From beginning to end, a complete story awaits. Wishing everyone who likes this post to miraculously shed 10 pounds. And for those who comment, may all your wishes come true. A friendly reminder from Lolo. The story starts now. When Song Yunan asked me for a divorce, it was the second week after he returned from a class reunion. What do you mean? I couldn't believe it. We had been married for 3 years, our relationship filled with love. Just days before, we had shared the news with both our families that we were preparing to have a child. Song Yunan looked exhausted. His eyes shadowed with fatigue. An unshaven stubble marked his chin, evidence of neglect. He avoided my gaze, lowering his eyes and speaking slowly. It's only temporary. I can't abandon her right now. He didn't say her name, but I knew who he meant. It was the woman who once left him his past moonlight, Suyu. Suyu's life had turned bleak. Her relationship with her husband had crumbled, yet he refused to divorce her. They were in the midst of a legal battle. She lived alone, and we'd once had a history. Now she was in distress, and only I could help her. I fell silent for a moment, and asked, "She wants a divorce, and you're representing her as her lawyer?" Song Yunan nodded. Slowly, he continued. Her husband is powerful and well-connected. This case will be extremely challenging. Our divorce, he added, is just to protect you. In the future, he hesitated, as if there was more he wanted to say. But I cut him off. So I should thank you for going to all this trouble? Perhaps my tone was laced with a bit too much sarcasm. Song Yunan took a heavy breath. Remaining silent for a long time, I stood up, grabbing the coat draped over the back of the chair. I said, "Then let's get divorced." Song Yunan stood up nervously. "It's so late. Where are you going?" From this moment on, we have nothing to do with each other. Leaving those words behind, I walked straight toward the door. Yet just as I reached the doorway, I couldn't resist looking back. My gaze sharp and unwavering, I asked, "Do you remember how badly you were beaten up after Suyu abandoned you, when her new lover came after you?" Song Yunan, back then you told me you would make her pay for leaving you. The door slowly closed, blocking out the sudden paleness on Song Yunan's face, and the rest of what I was about to say. Song Yunan, are you truly so self-sacrificing? Or are you simply a fool? Song Yunan and I were practically childhood sweethearts. During our school days, he was an outstanding student, handsome and charming. Even though his family struggled financially, he was still popular among the girls. I remember watching him toss countless love letters into the trash, his face showing nothing but irritation, telling me with absolute certainty that he had no interest in dating, that they all just annoyed him. From then on, I kept my distance, burying the fluttering feelings of my teenage years deep in my heart. It wasn't until later that I found out he actually made an exception for someone. That person was Suyu. Suyu was beautiful, a beauty laced with danger. In a time when everyone wore uniform bangs and school uniforms, she would wear a camisole under her jacket, her lips painted with a glimmering gloss, bold and shameless. She once cornered Song Yunan between classes, asking if he wanted to try something exciting. Song Yunan looked away in disgust. But in the next moment, she had hooked her arm around his neck and kissed him passionately. Watching his face flush bright red, Suyu laughed. "Such thin skin. Let's date." At that moment, I was standing at the other end of the hallway, holding the lunchbox his mom had asked me to bring him, staring blankly as the boy I liked chose someone else. Taking all the meat out of his lunch was the only way I could express my anger. Of course, he didn't care, because his world revolved around Suyu and the thrill of a new, exciting romance. I cried it out, determined to give up on him. But sometimes fate has a cruel sense of humor. They broke up not long after. When Suyu got bored, she mercilessly dumped him, turning her attention to the new school bully. who would later become her husband. The bully's family was wealthy and powerful, and he was arrogant, capable of giving her everything she wanted. But Song Yunan wasn't willing to end things just like that. He went after her again and again, until the school bully found out. That's when the bullying against him began. His father had passed away early, leaving his mother to raise him on her own. When times were tough, they relied on help from my family. How could he possibly stand against a powerful bully? I still remember the day we finished the college entrance exams. Everyone was celebrating, while I was searching through the streets in the pouring rain, until I finally found Song Yunan, barely conscious, in an alleyway. His exam ID had been torn to pieces and thrown to the ground. His face was battered and bruised. The moment he saw me, he pulled me into a tight hug, his whole body trembling. They want to ruin me. Song Yunan clenched his teeth. I swear I'll make the one who abandoned me pay. All I could do was comfort him, telling him that everything would get better. He suddenly lifted his head, gazing intensely into my eyes. Zhang Wanyi, I have no one but you. That's what he said. At that moment, I looked away from his gaze and quietly replied, I'll wait for you to retake the exams. I didn't want to take advantage of his vulnerable state, nor did I want to be anyone's replacement. Zhang Wanyi is simply Zhang Wanyi. I would never settle for less. I was cautious, even waiting until he retook the exams and got into my school. He pursued me for 3 whole years. He said, I finally realized what I was missing. There was such sincerity in his eyes. Finally, I decided to be brave just this once. The prince finally turned back to see the Cinderella standing behind him. It felt like the perfect ending to a fairy tale. At our 7-year reunion, Song Yunan prepared in advance by a full week. He bought me an expensive gown, along with a matching bag and shoes, a complete ensemble that cost a small fortune. I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief, thinking he was going a bit overboard. He simply replied, I just want everyone to know that being my wife brings happiness. But then something urgent came up at my company, and in the end, I couldn't make it to the reunion. Song Yunan was clearly upset about it. During my meeting at work, he kept calling me nonstop. When I didn't answer, he bombarded me with text messages. Zhang Wanyi, we're about to start a family. Can't you just quit that pointless job? Today's the reunion. So many old friends will be there. How do you expect them to see me? They'll just think I'm a failure, that I can't even support my own wife. I took a deep breath and replied as quickly as I could. Song Yunan, I'm not a trophy for you to flaunt. Even if my salary was much lower than his, this was a job I loved. No one could take that away from me. A married woman should always have her own source of income. Song Yunan's last text was, what's more important, your job or our marriage? I chose to turn off my phone. But that night, after the meeting ended, then I received a call from one of our classmates saying that Song Yunan had drunk too much and passed out at the restaurant. Panic immediately set in. Despite being both hungry and exhausted, I rushed to take a taxi there right away. Sure enough, Song Yunan had drunk quite a lot. The moment he saw me, this nearly 6-foot-tall man's eyes went red, and he fell toward me like a bear. He mumbled against my shoulder, Wife, I'm here. My heart ached terribly. With difficulty, I lifted him up and said, let's go, we're going home. But the next moment, he threw up all over my pants and shoes. I inhaled sharply, no longer hesitating, and quickly stuffed him into the car. We had to get home immediately. Just then, a graceful figure chased us out of the restaurant. She was holding his wallet, which he had forgotten. Without looking closely, I took it, thanked her, and prepared to leave. But the car door was suddenly held open by her hand. So, you're his wife. The taunting tone in her voice was unmistakable. Almost instinctively, I lifted my head. The neon lights from the distant street flickered, casting multicolored hues onto the woman's figure. 7 years had passed, And she had grown even more striking. Her long, slightly wavy hair cascaded over her shoulders, her floral V-neck dress revealing just enough. She looked poised and alluring, her makeup meticulous, her red lips seductive. I could feel the awkwardness in my own smile. It's been a while. How could it not be awkward? I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, a face worn down from a long day's work, looking exhausted and weary. No makeup, hair messily tied at the back of my head, and traces of vomit staining my clothes. 7 years have passed, and every time I see her, I feel like the one who's lost. Thankfully, Song Yunan broke the silence. He seemed to have sobered up a little. Or perhaps he hadn't. He simply rested his head on my shoulder, murmuring my name. Wife. Jongwonhee, he said. I shouldn't have called you. Shouldn't have disturbed your work. Please don't be angry with me. Okay. My heart melted completely. I knew it truly mattered to him. When I first decided to be with him, friends and family all voiced their disapproval, simply because his family was poor. He was just a struggling young man. That's why, over the years, Song Yunan had pushed himself relentlessly, not wanting anyone to think that I was somehow compromising by being with him. He wanted me to quit my job, wanted me to dress up and shine at important events, all just to prove himself. In those early years, we did live a hard life. Our home was a damp basement, where rainwater would seep through the ceiling, dripping into a small red plastic basin. We'd lie there, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the sound of raindrops. With red-rimmed eyes, Song Yunan would make me promises. Over and over again, Jongwonhee, I'll never let you down. He always felt he owed me something. But that wasn't true at all. In those penniless days, I was happier than most people. He would make me 3 meals every day, come pick me up from work in the pouring rain, and defend me fiercely if anyone dared to mistreat me. He gave his all to make me happy. He wasn't a perfect boyfriend, but he was the one who, if he only had $10, would give it all to me, not even keeping 3 coins for himself. We were in love. Together, we could face any hardship. At that moment, in the taxi, when he hugged me and called me his wife, those words echoed in my mind again. So I lifted my head and gave Siu a warm, genuine smile. Calm and composed. Yes, I said, we've been together for 7 years now. Our relationship is very strong. Suyu's expression faltered, a little lost. I felt a sense of relief. On the ride back, I held hands with Song Yunan the entire way, but in the end, he still let me down. Completely. The divorce was inevitable. I was kind-hearted enough to stay by his side to help save Suyu. We hired a lawyer to discuss the division of assets, a process that was long and complicated. It's almost laughable. When we moved into this house after our wedding, we had nothing, starting from scratch. We built everything with our own hands. But back then, we were happy, dreaming about the future every day. And now, years later, we sat here, facing a lengthy list of assets, just to divide them up, so we could part ways. Song Yunan looked exhausted, sitting by the table smoking. When it was over, I went to the balcony to get some air. Casually scrolling through my phone, I noticed a message from an old classmate I hadn't spoken to in a long time. She had sent me a video. Her voice message sounded uneasy. I hesitated for a long time before sending you this, afraid it might harm your relationship. But I think there are some things you need to know. In the video, I could faintly make out the restaurant from the reunion. In a narrow emergency exit hallway, 2 figures stood pressed together, intimately close. Suyu's voice, soft and alluring, asked, after all these years, have you missed me? Song Yunan's expression was tense, his hands gripping her shoulders. Suyu continued, between me and Jongwonhee, who's better? We're married now, he replied. Can a woman as dull as her really suit you? Suyu lifted her head and boldly kissed him. Song Yunan didn't pull away. When the kiss ended, Soo-yu, breathing heavily, nestled against his chest like a delicate bird. She said, "Song Yunan, as soon as my divorce is finalized, there's no us." Song Yunan interrupted her, speaking quietly. "I have to take responsibility for Jong Won-yi." With that, he turned to walk away. "Song Yunan." Soo-yu's voice broke as tears filled her eyes, calling out after him. "These past years, every single day I've thought of you. I regret it." "And you? Did you really never think of me? Not even once?" "Stop lying to yourself." Song Yunan's steps halted. After a long pause, with Soo-yu's sobs echoing in the background, he suddenly turned around, walking back towards her. His eyes were red at the corners, filled with a barely contained emotion, and he pressed Soo-yu against the wall, kissing her deeply. It lasted for a full minute. I finally stepped back into the room. The lawyer had already left. In the empty room, only Song Yunan remained. He looked as if he'd been waiting there for a long time. He was organizing the documents on the table and spoke up. "These are the finalized terms for the property division," without looking at them. I stood in the center of the room, speaking slowly. "I want the agreement redrafted. The house, the car, anything classified as joint property. I don't want a single cent of it." Song Yunan froze, his face twisting into a bitter smile. "Jong Won-yi," he asked, "do you have to make this so ugly? We've had 7 years together. Once this is all over, we could still be together, couldn't we?" So he remembered it had been 7 years. I leaned on the table with both hands, staring down into his eyes. "Don't disgust me. Spending even one more second with you makes me feel sick." 7 years of memories. Every piece of furniture in this house was something we chose together, decorated and arranged together. But now, looking at it all, even the memories have turned hideous to me. I didn't show Song Yunan the video. I needed to keep one card in my hand. If he tried to play tricks in the division of assets, I'd hand the video over to the lawyer. As for his affair, it didn't hurt as much as I thought it might. Perhaps the moment he asked for a divorce, my feelings for him had already faded completely. I felt nothing. I'm a dignified person. I don't want to ruin myself over a man like this. But in the end, we still didn't part on good terms. On the 3rd day after deciding to divorce, Soo-yu's husband brought people over to trash our home. This young master was surnamed Duen. His name was Duen Chen. His family was a prominent local business, but it was rumored that his methods were far from clean. In his early years, he had forcefully crushed many competitors. Somehow, he heard that Song Yunan was intent on helping Soo-yu. That night, he sent a gang of thugs to shatter our windows. I was asleep in the master bedroom at the time. I had already sent Song Yunan to sleep in the guest room until ownership of the house was settled. I wasn't planning on leaving, just in case he tried to hide any assets. In the instant it happened, several shards of glass flew into the room, nearly cutting me. I let out a terrified scream. Song Yunan rushed in immediately, pulling me into his arms without hesitation, shielding me in front of the broken window. The gang threw a few red bricks through the opening, one even striking Song Yunan's head. I trembled, looking down at my hands, now covered in his blood. The thugs quickly scattered and ran off. Throughout it all, Song Yunan remained calm. Shakily, I called the police. When I looked up again, I found him putting on his jacket, getting ready to go out. "Song Yunan," my voice broke. "Where are you going?" A trace of guilt flashed in his eyes, but he still said, "It's okay. They won't go too far with this. You should hide in the bathroom. I'll be back soon." In the early hours, I stood alone in my pajamas, by the gaping, broken window, feeling vulnerable and on the brink of collapse, clenching my fists tightly, fighting back my anger and fear. I said each word deliberately. Are you really going to leave me alone to face thugs who might come back at any moment? Song Yunan didn't even turn around. All he left me with were the words, "I'm sorry. Suyu, she needs me more than you do right now." I don't know how I survived those next few hours. The police arrived shortly after. I was still in my pajamas, but I was surprisingly calm, answering their questions with composure. By the time Song Yunan returned, behind him trailed Suyu, looking pitiful and delicate. Her makeup was still perfectly intact, as if nothing had happened. She clung tightly to Song Yunan's arm, and even smirked at me in a taunting way. Zhang Wanyi. The moment Song Yunan saw me, he immediately let go of her, rushing over to me in a panic. The wound on his forehead was still uncovered, with dried blood caked along the side of his face, making him look both pathetic and absurd. "Are you okay?" he began. But I interrupted him mid-sentence with a hard slap, catching him completely off guard. The blow made him stagger, his wound splitting open again, fresh blood seeping out. I stared straight into his eyes, my chest heaving with anger, and said one word at a time, "You are nothing but a piece of trash." He looked pained, opening his mouth, but no words came out. Behind him, Suyu stepped forward, putting on an air of sorrow, and said in a whining tone, "Miss Zhang, how could you hit him? Yunan was only worried about me. You misunderstood him." Without hesitation, I swung my other hand, slapping her hard as well. Her slender frame couldn't withstand the force, and she fell to the ground, a large red mark spreading across her pretty face. Song Yunan panicked instantly, exclaiming, "Zhang Wanyi, have you lost your mind?" "Yes, I have," I replied with a cold laugh. "Send the divorce papers by mail. I can't bear to look at you, to vile people for another second." I feel utterly disgusted. Even saying this, I still didn't feel satisfied. So I crouched down, grabbing a fistful of Suyu's hair. "Other people's husbands, are they especially attractive to you? Especially exciting?" Suyu's face twisted in pain, and she whimpered, "I didn't. I just asked him for a favor." "Oh, really? With so many lawyers out there, you couldn't find anyone else? You just had to go after your now successful ex-boyfriend. Did you really think no one would see through your intentions?" But it doesn't matter anymore. I threw her off in disgust. My voice, I see. I don't care anymore. If you love picking up trash, take it with you. With that, I turned and strode away. "Zhang Wanyi, can't you calm down?" Song Yunan tried to stop me, but I kicked his knee, making him bend over in pain. "Pathetic dog." I looked down at him with disdain. "Don't block my way. Both of you get lost." A few days later, the divorce papers arrived. I signed them without hesitation and mailed them back the same day. On the day I received the divorce certificate, the air felt fresher. I took a photo of the certificate, posted it in our classmates group chat, and tagged both Suyu and Song Yunan. The caption read, "I'm finally free. Congrats to Miss Su for stepping up. May the two of you last forever, locked in each other's lives." They didn't act like decent people, so I saw no reason to spare their reputation. The group chat exploded instantly, everyone asking what had happened. They quickly realized Suyu was the mistress, and Song Yunan had cheated on me during our marriage. Suyu started spamming the chat with multiple 60-second voice messages. I didn't even feel the slightest urge to listen. Amid the wave of tags directed at him, Song Yunan couldn't stay silent anymore. He could only dryly respond, "There's nothing going on. We separated amicably." I turned on my voice message and said, "Bullshit." The chat immediately went silent, as if everyone held their breath. I requested extended leave from work and decided to go on a solo trip to clear my mind. After all, how many more 7-year chapters does one have in life? I needed a way to untangle the knots in my heart. Since it wasn't peak season, there was no need to jostle with crowds. The weather these days was lovely too. I roamed around freely, truly enjoying myself. In the tour group, there was a young guy who used his camera to take a few pictures of me. He showed them to me, asking, "So how do they look?" In the photos, I was wearing a long, floral dress perfect for a vacation vibe, standing by the shore playing with seashells. My long hair was swept up gently by the breeze, revealing my features beautifully. I had a constant smile on my face, still with no makeup on. The difference between happiness and sadness, it could be so vast. I felt a tremor in my heart, looked up and sincerely said, "They're beautiful, thank you." The young man smiled too, revealing a small, charming fang. "Would it be possible to exchange one of these photos for your WeChat contact?" I looked up and sized him up again, smiling as I replied, "I'm afraid that might be a little difficult." "No worries," he said, his eyes full of excitement and determination. "The journey is still long. And so for the rest of the trip." He kept taking photos of me throughout the trip, and those photos were truly beautiful. The person in the photos looked confident and radiant, almost like a different version of myself. I couldn't get enough of them, constantly posting them on my social media along the way, while I was having the time of my life. Suyu and Duanchen's divorce trial began. On the flight back, as soon as I landed, I received a photo from a friend. It was taken outside the courthouse. Duanchen stood there, dressed head to toe in designer clothes, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his expression arrogant and hostile, his eyes filled with threat. Song Yunan stood in front of him, blocking his way. Behind them, Suyu looked frail and terrified, her face pale with fear, her fragile body swaying as if she might collapse at any moment. My friend said, "You missed it." Duanchen was so aggressive. I heard he's been calling and harassing Song Yunan's law firm, trying to get him fired, and even tried to bribe his way in. He's in bad shape now. I didn't particularly care. But that night, in the comments under my vacation photos, I saw a comment from Song Yunan. He asked, "Who took those pictures?" I didn't reply. Why would it matter to him? After dinner, when I checked my phone again, he had deleted the question and instead commented, "Hope you're having a good time." Later, I received a voice message from him. For the first 30 seconds, it was mostly wind noise. But at the very end, his slurred, drunken voice broke through. "Wife, the house feels so quiet without you. Every single day. I feel so exhausted. There's no one to support me, no one to recognize me. It's as if I've returned to how things used to be." I listened silently to the end of his voice message. And then, feeling an intense wave of irritation, I blocked him. I could imagine how he must look right now. While I was out enjoying myself and letting go, he was still living in that house with the broken windows. When we divided up the assets, I'd kept my word. I hadn't left him so much as a single rug. Career setbacks had hit him hard, reminding him of those early days after graduation. Back then, no one believed he would make it as a lawyer. No one had faith in him, except for me. I believed in him unconditionally, supporting him, encouraging him. When he was forced to drink with clients until he bled from his stomach, I made him recovery soup and took him to the hospital. When no one would hire him, I went with him to knock on doors, bowing deeply alongside him, pleading for someone to give him a chance. And when he won his first case, I spent half a month's salary on a gift to congratulate him. So many things like that. Far too many. Only later did I finally understand. Never help a boy grow up. Now, as he hits rock bottom once again, he remembers just how good I was to him. But none of that could erase the fact that he abandoned me the moment he succeeded. 7 years of my youth, lost entirely. He may feel nostalgic, but all I feel is disgust. On the last day of my trip, the young photographer finally got his wish and exchanged contacts with me. After adding him, I learned he was still a student. His name was Chi Chang, a graduate student, and photography was just his hobby. The way he nervously asked if I had a boyfriend was adorable, but I lightly patted his head, saying, "You're still too young, little brother." Chi Chang looked thoroughly dissatisfied and told me, "Time is on my side." I didn't argue. People's hearts change easily. I had already learned that from my time with Song Yunan. Sadly, he himself never grasped that truth. The day I returned to my province, while lugging my suitcase off the plane, I received a call from a friend. The situation had taken a dramatic turn. Suyu had decided not to divorce. It was a long story. But to put it briefly, someone had caught photos of her and Song Yunan being intimate. The timing was around the day he sent me that voice message. They were at a bar together and later went home together, where in a drunken haze they ended up in bed. At some point, it seems Song Yunan briefly sobered up and sent me that sad voice message, which I blocked. In any case, Duen Chen's people captured it all. With the photos in hand, Duen Chen agreed to the divorce, willing to let this pair of wild lovebirds be together. But he made it clear that Suyu wouldn't get a single cent. I'm sure. In his foolish way, there was a brief moment when Song Yunan felt compelled to take responsibility for Suyu. That is, until Suyu rejected him, staring in disbelief as she questioned him. "If I don't get any money, why would I even hire you for this?" Song Yunan looked even more shocked than she did. "But you said you were abused." Couldn't bear it anymore, just wanted to be free of him. What a fool. Do you think I divorced just to get nothing? What, you think I did it for you? So naive, so clueless. You're just as pathetic as you were before. Suyu's expression twisted, no longer carrying that helpless damsel act. From the beginning, it was all about Duen Chen's money. And Song Yunan truly was nothing but a gullible fool. He stood there, frozen for a long, long time, just as Suyu was about to walk out. He couldn't help but ask, his voice trembling, "Then what am I to you?" "A complete idiot," I said without hesitation. My friend on the other end of the phone burst into laughter. The things we can't have always look better, don't they? Until we hold them and realize how rotten and disgusting they truly are. Back in school, he was wrapped around Suyu's finger. With just a crook of her finger, he would hand over his whole heart. Who would have thought after all these years, the same story would play out again? Some people just never learn. But just be careful. My friend said over the phone. "He knows you're coming back today." I didn't hear the rest of her sentence, because in the crowd at the arrivals, I had already spotted Song Yunan's face. He looked worn out, his suit rumpled, as if it hadn't been pressed in ages. His complexion was pale, and his eyes were dull. He offered to drive me home. I sat in the back seat and realized he was instinctively heading back to our old address. "Better not get the address wrong," I said, expressionless. There was a pause before he finally asked, "So where are you living now?" I gave him the address. "To the small apartment I bought before our marriage. Not in the best location, but the deed only had my name on it. It was entirely my own." "Are you comfortable living there?" he asked, without someone nauseating around. Of course I'm comfortable. A question so foolish. I didn't even want to dignify it with a response. The car quickly reached my building. I didn't feel the need for any courtesy and grabbed my bag, ready to leave immediately. But after several tugs on the door handle, the door wouldn't open. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, fighting the urge to throw my bag at his face. "I'm not used to it," he said, his eyes red at the corners. Slowly, he turned to look at me. "Zhang Wanyi, without you in my life, I don't know how to go on." I watched him with utter disinterest and asked, "So, He hesitated for a moment, then continued. Wani, come back to me. So you deceived me. They got me fired from my job. And now they send thugs to harass me every other day. I'm dealing with nights and nights of insomnia, nearing a nervous breakdown every single night. I think of you. It turns out only you would support me unconditionally, would help me no matter what. I sat in silence for a long time. The air in the car grew so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, I spoke slowly. In the past, when Suyu abandoned you, you turned to me, pursued me for 3 years until I finally agreed. Through all the ups and downs, when you were poor, when you were at your lowest, I was the one by your side. Then you achieved success. And yet you still divorced me for her ... And now, once again, you've hit rock bottom because of her. And now you want to come back to me? Songyunon, do I really look like a fool to you? His expression turned unbearably awkward. There's no need to be so harsh. He said, our divorce wasn't because we fell out of love. You're the only one I've ever truly cared about. I never even intended for us to really be apart. Can't you give me another chance? His words made me want to laugh. So I actually did. I laughed and asked him, when you were making out with Suyu at that reunion, did it ever cross your mind that this day would come? Song Yunan's head jerked up, staring at me in disbelief. What? I simply pulled up the video and shoved it in front of his face. Song Yunan, you cheated during our marriage, and now you're here talking to me about love? The nerve you have is astounding. His face contorted with pain, and he gripped the steering wheel tightly. It wasn't like that, he mumbled. It was Suyu. She was the one who made the first move. She's always been this way. I could have had a good life, a happy marriage, a loving partner. It was all because of Suyu. She kept coming after me, again and again, ruining everything. It's her fault. Zhang Wanyi. I never even loved her. I cut him off, expressionless. You're just bitter. He looked like he'd finally found some relief, reaching out to hold my hand. But I continued. Someone as selfish and greedy as you, someone who doesn't know what loyalty is, doesn't deserve love. The slightest temptation shakes you, whether it's Suyu or me. Whether it's someone who stood by you at your lowest, like I did. You only care about yourself. A person with no loyalty, chasing thrills to patch up your ego. You're nothing but a pathetic fool. Song Yunan. If anything, I'm grateful to Suyu. Thanks to her, I saw your true colors early on. Leaving you was the best decision of my life. My words wounded him deeply, and he looked at me in disbelief, his hands trembling slightly. How could you? He asked, urgently. Zhang Wanyi, we've been together for 7 years. That kind of bond. How could you just let it go so easily? It's precisely because of those 7 years, I replied, deliberately enunciating every word, that when it ends, I'd rather it not end in ugliness. When he was at his lowest, we were so in love. As he grew more successful, he convinced himself that this love would never fade. He took everything for granted, believing that no matter what he did, I would eventually forgive him. He was certain he'd never lose me. That's why he cheated, and why, facing Suyu, he thought of his earlier failures, and felt the urge to prove he was no longer the man he once was, feeding his own fragile pride. So he thought of himself as noble, when in reality, he was just cheating, trying to save face in front of his first love, hoping to rekindle an old flame, all while planning to smooth things over with me afterward, thinking he could keep both his marriage and his ego intact, wanting it all at once, greedy to the core. Where in the world does everything just fall into place so easily? Song Yunan, you once said something to me when you were pursuing me. Now, I'll return it to you. You'll never know what you missed out on. That broke him. That day, He apologized to me over and over. When I finally returned home, I looked out from my balcony, and his car was still parked below, unmoving until late into the night. I didn't know how sincere his apologies really were, and I didn't care. When I loved him, I gave my all. When I stopped loving him, I left without hesitation. Every choice I made, I was true to myself. As for him, I'm sure he'll face his own reckoning. Song Yunan is still young. Even if he's lost his job for now, he still has a chance to start over. But unfortunately, Suyu's second betrayal, along with my leaving him, pushed him over the edge. He's now caught up in a dead-end cycle. I heard he's started investigating Duen Chen. Not for Suyu this time, but purely out of spite. The Duen family has certainly been involved in shady business practices, and there are plenty of victims. But most people feared the consequences, so they never dared to dig too deep. The Duen family put pressure on him too. He was even chased by thugs on more than one occasion. Financially, he'd already been nearly cleaned out after the divorce, and unemployment only deepened his losses. Soon enough, he had to start selling his car and even his house, and eventually, he was left with almost nothing. Suyu once begged him to stop digging. After all, if he continued, she would be affected too. On the surface, Song Yunan agreed. That year, for Duen Chen and Suyu's wedding anniversary, they threw a grand banquet, inviting various high-profile guests. They intended to play a promotional video for the Duen family business, but when the projector turned on, it was a video of Madame Duen Suyu and Song Yunan kissing in a stairwell. I heard everything spiraled into chaos that day. Duen Chen nearly beat Suyu to death in front of everyone. Meanwhile, the mastermind, Song Yunan, faced his own retribution. He had one of his hands broken. Yet even then, he didn't stop. The following year, he finally succeeded in sending Duen Chen to prison. Tax evasion, illegal profiteering. All of Duen Chen's assets were frozen and seized. That day, he tried to call me, but unfortunately, I wasn't near my phone. The one who answered it for me was Chi Chen. In the past, I would have never imagined myself with someone as young as Chi Chang, but the heart wants what it wants. He is sincere, passionate, respectfully keeping his distance when needed, a steady presence, gently chipping away at my heart bit by bit. Unlike Song Yunan's empty sweet talk, Chi Chang shows his feelings through real actions. Our relationship happened naturally, the way a river flows to the sea. As for what that call was about, Chi Chang relayed the message to me. He said, the man on the other end sounded overjoyed, excitedly saying that he had finally made everyone pay. He wanted to know if I would give him another chance. Just like before, Chi Chang said he sounded crushed when he realized it wasn't me on the line. He said, I almost told him to call back later, but things suddenly got noisy on his end. Later, I heard from other friends that after losing everything, Suyu went mad. She bought a fruit knife and stabbed Song Yunan. Did he die? I asked curiously. Probably not, my friend replied, but he's in pretty bad shape now. Duen Chen broke one of his hands before he went to prison, and now he's unemployed, broke, and after being stabbed, he was hospitalized with no one by his side. Chi Chang, listening beside me, whispered, so are you going to see him? He's young after all. With a heart full of youthful curiosity, I smiled and shook my head. No matter what happens to him, it has nothing to do with me. A broken mirror cannot be made whole. No amount of effort could ever undo the harm he caused me. Besides, I have someone more important in my life now. I won't let a failed relationship stop me from loving again, nor will I let it keep me from moving forward. My future is still long and full of promise. The end.